Hello, I'm Professor McCoy, and today I want to talk about Hitler, Satan, and the post-World War II consensus. Now, knowing that this is going to be somewhat of a controversial video, I say, just get right into the topic. Now, I'll say from the outset that I'm far from the first person to make a point about uh, Hitler replacing Satan in the popular consciousness. This has been popularized by figures as diverse as Tom Holland, the historian of Christianity, to Jonathan Pageau, who have commented on and interacted with on this channel before. And I think that it is a profound point, but it's also something that I think that we should notice, especially in the symbolism that we draw upon for our popular culture, for our popular depictions of things. And now, given that this is a well-developed point, my contribution to this, at least I hope, will be an interesting thought experiment, a new way or an additional way of looking at this comparison or this symbolic replacement to see exactly how it is that we as a society, broadly speaking, myself, you, the viewers, anyone else we might interact with, how we think of evil in the context of our present society. And so I offer you a hypothetical. What if, absent any additional context, you were to come across a piece of art, presumably political art, but we shouldn't make assumptions, that depicts the hosts of heaven, the heavenly angels, as Nazis? Now, I did create something like this using Grok, and even when Grok was having its Mecha Hitler moment, so to speak, um, it did have some trouble designing exactly this sort of putting this exact sort of symbolism and imagery together. Um, so the best I could come up with. What I ask you, the viewer, what does this mean? What do you think that this means? What is this saying? Is a piece of art like this something that is depicting the heavenly hosts as Nazis and say, for example, if we were to see them pursuing and persecuting and fighting against and destroying the demons of hell depicted as using stereotypical Jewish iconography? What would we think this means? Because the way I see it, there are two options. This could be a praise of Nazism. This could be a pro-Nazi piece of art. But my guess is that's not what our minds immediately came to. My guess is that upon seeing a piece of art like this, you and I, and just about anyone else, would assume that this is an atheist critique of God and Christianity and heaven. In fact, we see this in media all of the time. We see sort of atheistic themes depicting God and Christian symbolism as nefarious. And how are they depicted as nefarious? Not by depicting them as satanic, not by depicting them as doing anything in particular, but by imbuing them with Nazi imagery. We see this a lot. It happens all the time. The point here, of course, is that when we evaluate the relevant symbols, the symbols themselves and their associations do not necessarily have intrinsic meaning. What I mean by that is that this piece of art, a piece of art like this, is ambiguous in itself. It could mean either of opposite things. I mentioned Jonathan Pageau earlier. That one of his earliest videos that really came about was his metaphysics of Pepe, talking about Pepe the Frog. This one of the sort of earliest salvos in the great meme war of the last decade or so. Right? This symbol that can mean almost anything, depending on its context, and even say a Hitler Pepe could be pro-Nazi or it could be anti-Nazi, depending on the context, depending on the poster, and depending on the viewer. In itself, it doesn't say anything in particular. It could say all sorts of things. And I think the same stands for artistic depictions. So what this can tell us is not something about the art itself or even the artist, but something really about ourselves. Because as I said, I think our immediate assumption upon seeing a comparison of angels and the heavenly hosts to Nazis is not a lauding of the Nazis, but rather a condemnation of heaven, a condemnation of God and the angels. If I were to, and I will not depict this, I've already gone close enough to blasphemy here, but if we were to see, say, Jesus Christ depicted as Adolf Hitler, I think that it would be very clear that this is an anti-Christian comic, not a pro-Nazi comic, right? And I think that this tells us that our baseline cultural assumptions, at least mine and probably yours as well, is that the evil of the Nazis is far more symbolically impactful than the good even of heaven. Which symbol will overpower the other? At least in our minds. And that tells us how we think. Now, for example, like, to go with with saying why, first of all, why I was uncomfortable and why I even found it difficult to drag even Mecha Hitler Grok through the process of creating this, albeit mediocre, bit of AI art of the heavenly hosts depicted as in Nazi regalia, or further, why I would not go so far as to depict Jesus Christ as Adolf Hitler. It's not because I'm afraid of making the Nazis look good. The reason I'm uncomfortable with it is because of blasphemy. I am sort of innately, almost even subconsciously, concerned with making the forces of heaven look bad, which is not something that should be possible. The symbolism, again, if we are to take the order of things in the actual cosmos to be the way that they ought to be and the way that they are, this idea that if we take the sort of heavenly hierarchies seriously, that God and his angels are so far above human affairs that they're great and grand and ultimately good, then anything comparing that we compare to heaven should elevate the thing that we're comparing. It shouldn't diminish the thing that it's being compared to. But we culturally have an exception for the Nazis. We see the Nazis as so categorically evil. And of course, don't get me wrong, the Nazi ideology was evil, and all, or at least most of the Nazis, at least who had any kind of culpability in the matter, were in fact evil, but they were evil men. They were fallen human beings doing fallen human being things. Doing some of the worst things in human history, but certainly not the worst. I mean, we killed God, if I might remind you. All, if you will. I make this point to get you to critically examine the way that you think of our hierarchy of being, the way that you think of good and evil, and especially the symbols we have of good and evil. And to remind us, as a lot of other people have, that as bad as Hitler was, he's not as bad as Satan. Anyway, that's all I have for this one. So it's something for us to ponder, hopefully. And until next time, thanks for watching.